Hey all, it's Starzy, and today we are going to be talking about some of the books that disappointed me in 2020. Now, I don't even necessarily dislike all of these books, although there are some I definitely had problems with. Overall, I was just disappointed in them for one reason or another, often because of unmet expectations. So yeah, I didn't dislike majority of these books, but I've got 10 books to talk about today because it's a nice rounded number and I was able to come up with that many. And yeah, that's what we're doing. It's also meant to be fairly warm today, I think, so hopefully we'll get through this before I melt under here. We'll start off with the books I have physically, I guess, just to make things easier on myself. Also, do we like my chair? I finally have a proper gaming chair that my boyfriend got me for Christmas. I'm going to start off with the book that I feel the most indifferent about. Probably the book that I read all year that I felt the most indifferent about, which is why it's on this list. And that's Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. Now, I didn't dislike this, but I also didn't like it. And so the reason that it's on my disappointing list is because I thought I was going to love this. I'd seen so many people in the fantasy book community hype it up, and I'd particularly seen a lot of people say, you know, if you liked Nevernight, you'll like this, which I really enjoyed Nevernight. I really, enjoy watching badass female assassins and stuff, which is what, is kind of in here. And yet, I felt nothing by the end of it. And I could probably only recall like one scene from the whole thing that's the only thing I remember. Basically when a man, got served and he deserved it. And that's the only thing I remember from this book. So it's a disappointing book because I had high expectations, but I feel nothing, I remember nothing, just nothing. No feelings whatsoever either way. And it's not something I feel necessarily often with the book, and so I don't really know what happened with this, and I couldn't even tell you why, but that's where we're at. Another fantasy that I had high expectations for, and this one I had high expectations because I really enjoyed the first book, and it is a sequel. That is Bloody Rose by Nicholas Ames. I really enjoyed Kings of the Wild. Now, I rated this 4 stars when I finished it, but the more I've thought about it, the more I thought I probably shouldn't have given it more than a 3, just because since I read it, all I've really thought about is the problems I had with it. And I've talked about them in my wrap-up where I talked about this, which I don't remember which wrap-up that was, but it was mostly to do with the queer representation, essentially. There were some things that made me a bit uncomfortable in terms of the bi rep and age gap in female-female relationships, and a few things there that made me a little bit uncomfortable. So they were the problems I had, and also just, again, it's one of those ones where I don't really remember much about the book now otherwise. Like, I enjoyed it well enough while I was reading it, but I didn't love it. So even outside of the actual problems I had with it, I just wasn't in love with it like I was with the first book. And so even if I didn't have those specific problems, which I definitely did, I still felt a little underwhelmed and disappointed. And again, I couldn't tell you exactly why. But again, all I can think of is the uncomfy feelings. Obviously, it's a man writing queer women, and so it definitely played into some stereotypes and things that I am sick of seeing. The one other book that I have physically here is Basic Witches, which is a non-fiction witchcraft book. And this is why I do this, is because it's not really witchcraft, although it is, because really anything can be witchcraft. That's a much deeper conversation to have, especially since I'm coming from a skeptic perspective, which is why I thought that I would like this more, because it's also written by skeptics. But what ended up happening was it kind of just was this weird self-help book that I didn't love everything it was doing. Some of it was just weird, the way it was using witchy terms for general life things, and then some of it was also just uncomfortable and an advice I wouldn't necessarily recommend. Again, this is something I've talked about twice. I think I talked about it in a wrap-up, and I also talked about it in my video about every book I have rated 1 or 2 stars. So this is one where I kind of wasn't just disappointed by it, I also kind of didn't like it, which is a real bummer because it is so beautiful. Got a jasmine green tea today. I can tell you it smells really good. So one of the most recent books to me, because I read it in December, so I just talked about it in my December wrap-up. Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson, I think it is. A YA mystery. This is one of the books that, I didn't really like. I was just kind of uninterested in most of it, didn't really like the characters, and just felt frustrated by the end because so little is revealed by the end of the book. And I know it's a series, but still give me something. Again, I just talked about it in my wrap-up, but I just didn't really like it. I just didn't really like it. Radiance by Grace Draven. This is definitely a case of a book that I didn't dislike. I liked it kind of well enough. The only reason I'm putting it on my disappointing list is because I have seen so many people rave about this fantasy romance. And I enjoy fantasy and I enjoy romance. This is probably my first time reading a fantasy romance though, outside of urban fantasy, and also, I guess, things like A Court of Thorns and Roses of fantasy romance, but something that's categorized as more romance than fantasy. This is probably my first time outside of urban fantasy, I think. Anyway, tangent we don't need to go into. I saw so many people speaking so highly of this, including some of my actual friends. One of my friends kept recommending me to read it. And again, I liked it well enough. It was okay, but I just wasn't in love with it. And I think, unfortunately, part of it is that, it's a beautiful romance, don't get me wrong, it's a friends to lovers, and it's beautiful and wholesome. But I think that's part of my problem, is that they were too nice to each other for my tastes in romance. That sounds horrible. But it's because I'm the type of person, which I think is also, it's also a bit of an Australian thing, that you give each other shit. Even in a loving way, you mock each other and stuff, and banter. What I'm trying to say here is banter, particularly in Australia in general, is a very big thing. And I'm used to banter in my relationships, both romantic and friendships. There's often banter. And so their relationship was so wholesome that it didn't really have any banter. This is a really long-winded way of getting around to this point, but I think that's why I felt just about it, because as lovely as it was, I also didn't care that much about the fantasy plot that was going on, I guess, as well. There was also that. But I think that's what some of it came down to. I just wasn't excited by the romance because of that. Although they did, call each other ugly at the start, but it's not really the same thing, as true banter. I don't know. But again, I would definitely recommend this book. I would still recommend this book. It was just disappointing because everyone had told me, read this, you're gonna love it, and I've just felt like, yeah, that's alright. That's alright. Then a book that I actually did dislike was, I think it's called The Year Shakespeare Ruined Your Life. No idea who the author is. I actually read an arc of this through NetGully. It's a YA contemporary about a lesbian girl who is involved with a school production and her kind of navigating crushes for the first time and all that kind of stuff. Which was a really cute premise, and YA contemporary isn't my favourite genre, but I have really enjoyed some YA contemporaries I've read before when they had a queer female protagonist. So that was kind of what drew me in with this, but I didn't really like it. But the characters the characters were just really flat. They didn't seem to have any real personality or trait to them outside of stereotypes, and so I didn't care about any of them, and so I didn't really care about the romance either. And then there was also just all the friggin' adults were friggin' stupid, the teachers, some of their decisions, dude. It's one of those books that if I didn't have an arc of it, I probably wouldn't have finished it, because I just didn't care and I just didn't like it. And yeah, again, I've spoken about it before, probably in more detail, but Punk 57, which again, I can't remember the author of, kind of a popular-ish romance author. So this is a romance, but this is the book that really established for me that any type of bully romance probably really isn't my thing. I know that I just talked about banter, but there's a difference between loving banter and genuinely being awful to each other, which is what this book was. And the two love interests were so awful to each other for a good majority of the book, including some really uncomfortable stuff that led to sex scenes. Like, that by the end, I just couldn't get behind them being together, because I was like, no, that's so unhealthy. That's so unhealthy. Yeah, not here for unhealthy relationships. I mean, it was like well written, and the smut was well written, and so it was an easy read, but I just could not get behind their relationship. And that's, yeah. So as I said, and those type of like bully romances, or any of those type of romances where they're just genuinely awful to each other, yeah, not for me. Only the wholesome, good-natured banter. Mayhem. Again, don't remember the author. This was another arc I had through NetGalley, and I think I rated it 3 stars. I did kind of, like, I liked this book, but I also had problems with it. So I think I rated it 3 stars. But this is one that I was really excited about. One, because I didn't actually go seeking it. I got emailed about it, so that was one of the first times that had ever happened to me. So that was exciting in itself. But also, like, I was excited about this book anyway because it mentioned The Lost Boys as an inspiration, and The Lost Boys, the 80s vampire movie, is like my favorite movie of all time, just because it's so fun and nostalgic to me at this point. So I was really excited because of that. And I think it also mentioned like The Craft as an inspiration in the blurb. So I was very excited. It's a YA fantasy, and I definitely liked some of the stuff that was going on, but I didn't love all of it. And also, so much was ripped directly from The Lost Boys that it was, you know, on that line of, is this inspiration or plagiarism? Like, even, and some of it didn't even make sense. Like, the very last page of the book had a quote directly from The Lost Boys, and it had just been given to a different character to say in this book. But it wasn't even relevant to this book at all. Like, why are you putting that on your last page? It doesn't even make sense to be there. I get you want to tie to the, like, it's too much. It's too much. Like, I need to stop, because, like, I will rant on and on about, like, it was too much. And, like, if you've never seen The Lost Boys, or you're not that familiar with it, you probably wouldn't notice, and you might enjoy this book more, to be honest. But because I'm so familiar with The Lost Boys, like, I was picking up on every single thing, being like, at first it was cool. I was like, oh, these characters are in The Lost Boys. It's kind of cool that they're making a cameo. But then it was just more and more and more, and it was like, I don't know how I feel now. I don't know how I feel. Like, I kind of liked it, but I also had a lot of problems, and it was uncomfortable. And the other thing was, it felt very nostalgic. Like, this book felt very much like it was relying on the nostalgia of the 80s. That's what a lot of it felt like. And because it's a YA, you know, its target audience is teenagers, and teenagers aren't going to be nostalgic about the 80s. I mean, I only have that nostalgia because I grew up watching 80s movies, like The Lost Boys. So it also made it a bit like, who is this book for? I don't know. I didn't hate it, but I had a lot of feelings. It's one I kind of want to go back and reread to really settle on how I feel, but, like, yeah, I had a lot of feelings by the end of that. Like, it was the last page. The last page and that quote was what really put me over the edge with frustration. Anyway, moving on. So, Well Met is one I also have on here, which is another book I rated 3 stars. So I liked it, again, well enough. It was just, again, it was an extremely hyped romance that I just felt meh about by the end. And I think I read this all the way back in last January. Like, I read it a year ago now, so I don't even remember anything about it, and I feel like there was something that I actually had a problem with when I read it, but I couldn't tell you for the life of me what that actually was now. But again, it was mostly the being so hyped and me feeling so meh about it. And again, I remember nothing about it. She was at a Renaissance fair with a niece or something. I don't know. I know a lot of people love that romance, and again, it's not one that I don't recommend, it's just one that I personally wasn't in love with, and so because I didn't feel the same, I wasn't at the same level of hype as everyone else, and so that's why it was kind of disappointing to me. And then the last one, the last one I have on here, I'm just laughing because I just watched Penny's, like, best fantasy video, and this was on her best fantasy list. Again though, I didn't dislike it. But I did fall asleep listening to it. So, Call Down the Hawk by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the first book in the new series that follows on from the Raven Boys, the Raven cycle, following Ronan? I can never remember anyone's names because there's so many characters in YA fantasy novels that are called Rowan or Ronan that I can never remember which one's a Rowan and which one's a Ronan. It's a big problem. Why are those names so common? Anyway, but that's what it is. And there was definitely stuff in there that I liked and found really interesting. But again, I was listening to it and I fell asleep a few times. So, like, I don't know whether that's entirely my fault for listening to the audiobook rather than trying to read it physically. But it's just, I think I'm just including it here because I fell asleep listening to it so many times. So clearly it wasn't holding my attention. And again, I could probably tell you very little about what happened. Again, I can remember like 1 or 2 scenes. Yeah, and I remember even right after finishing the book, I had no idea what had just happened at the end and couldn't remember like 5 minutes after listening to it. And I wasn't sleeping through that part. So, I don't know. This is when I feel like maybe I should go back and try and read physically, because I did read the original Raven cycle physically, and because of the way Maggie Stiefvater writes these books, I think they can be quite difficult to follow on audio because there's so much weird stuff going on. So again, I think it was more the audiobook than necessarily the book itself, so it's one I might need to give a second chance in the future. But I was just so disengaged from it while listening to it, again, falling asleep multiple times, that's why I felt it had to be on this list. Because I don't know if there's any other books I really listen to that put me to sleep regularly. No. So, anyway, yeah, those are my 10 disappointing reads of 2020. Have you read these? Do you disagree with me? What was your most disappointing read of 2020? What is my cat doing? Let me know, and as usual, let's chat books in the comments. This mug was also a Christmas present, actually. From my mom. I was considering doing a Christmas haul, but then as soon as I got home on Christmas, I like put everything away and wasn't sure if anyone would be interested. And also, this is only the second time I've filmed this year, so I've been busy. Now that Australia's opened back up, I've been busy. Anyway, yeah. Stay safe, stay educated, and Starzy out.